Okay, good to go here. All right, good. Y'all finish. We're not in a hurry. It's Wednesday night. We can be relaxed, right? Unless Marshall needs to get home. Are you in a hurry to get home? No. Okay, good.
Ask me that Sunday afternoon.
Sunday afternoon. Thank you, Marshall.
Okay. Yes, I have something you did.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's important. Did it run last year? Did it run late? The Derby? Did, oh, it's not? Okay. I don't know. NASCAR, of course. It's cars racing, not horses. New Hampshire. They have cars in New Hampshire? Okay. It's good that technology's getting that far up. Okay. Before you know it, they'll be in Vermont too. So Larry updated me just a little bit with Bethany. She's supposed to be closing. There's some issues. The house where she was going fell through. So it's more things are like what's going to happen. And doesn't mean things won't just fall into place, but they may not. The place where she was going temporarily, the lady's mom, I think, had a stroke or something. So, you know, just on every cylinder, there's some small issue. So let's keep being in prayer about Bethany. Sue sent out an update for prayer from Jay about a coworker, and Heidi and Corey, right? I got those right. They live in Michigan, but they're Wisconsin. They're the same. Right? I'm sorry. Up there, Minnesota, all of that, just the same. But I'm sure they don't think that. But both of their parents had strokes, and so it's just a particularly difficult time for them. Wow. That's hard. Anybody else we need to update or pray about? And Clark, would you word our prayer here in just a second? Anybody else? Anything else come into you? Okay. Next Tuesday, Rebecca Rios turning 90 and sending her cards, right? Okay. There you go. Yeah. Sue knows how to be sneaky. That's the number one requirement of a church kind of secretary, is be sneaky. I've known some good ones. Okay, Clark.
Heavenly Father, holy is your name. We are so grateful to be in your presence and to study your word. We pray that you'll be with those who have a special need. Continue to watch over the Evans family. Make your plans for them work out. Help them not to be anxious. Please be with Corey and Heidi, J-Dynamic's co-workers. Help them to care for their fathers, to not be anxious, and we pray that your hand will be upon their fathers to heal them, strengthen them, to help them to function well. We pray, Lord, that as we study your word tonight, you'll open our hearts, help us to be better disciples of yours. In Christ's name.
Amen. So we continue Mark. We're at the first of chapter 7. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes had come from Jerusalem, and remember, he's up with those, okay, they're Jews, but they're not here in Jerusalem Jews. They're probably halfway suspect anyway. West Virginians used to be Virginians, but not so much anymore, right? Probably kind of like that. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed, I wonder why they noticed. I think the implication is they were looking for something. Yeah, they were looking. They noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands. That is, without washing them. And this is not a hygiene issue, right? This is a religious issue, of course, because they had ways of doing that. For the Pharisees, in parentheses, Mark tells us, and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it, or the idea is purifying themselves. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups and pots and bronze kettles. So let's stop there. Is that a bad thing that they have those traditions and habits? No. It probably depends how you grew up, how thorough you are, right? And some of you are pretty thorough. The fork touches the floor, you don't blow it off, you get a new one, right? But this is a matter of showing how religious you are, how pure you are, how, in their way of thinking, how clean. So, verse 5, the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why do your disciples not live? Another word for live there would be walk. Why do your disciples not live according to the traditions of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? And I think that's a legitimate question, right? That'd be a good question to ask. Yeah, right? If I don't know how I could dress that would be more awkward, but if I dressed in some cultural way that nobody around here did, you might go, why are you wearing that? Right? Because it's not something people around here wear. Now, we're a lot more mixed up. Those kind of things aren't necessarily as clear. But, I've talked about the Caring Kitchen before. We had some people who came there that didn't eat pork. Well, one of the things I could get in bulk sometimes was ham. We respected that. We found ways to feed them other than with pork. But, they were serious about that. And it kind of stuck out because nobody else had trouble eating pork. He said to them, Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. Now, I'm going to stop for just a second, because we can run with this verse and miss, I think, what Mark's trying to show us. The issue here is not that they have traditions, not that they have more specific teachings, and I think Jesus is going to make that clear, but the real verse that we're landing on from the phrase from Isaiah is, but their hearts are far from me. This is about heart, not about saying traditions are bad. Sometimes we think, well, our connection goes all the way back to the first century. But I can tell you, if a first century person walked into our church, it would be awkward for them, right? Because we do things. We have traditional ways of doing things that would be different. They would go, why do you have all these rows of seats? Right? They wouldn't recognize it. So Jesus is going to deal with their hearts, not that they've made traditions, because sometimes you need more specific rules from the general rule, right? And we're going to see that here. Let's continue, verse 9. Then he said to them, You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and mother. And where did he say that? 10 Commandments. I mean, it's one of the 10, right? It's a biggie. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean to honor your father and mother? Well, what they had done with their traditions was define what that looks like. Right? This is how it means to honor. Do we have any traditions like that show how we honor our parents? What are some of them? Mother's Day and Father's Day, right? Do we have to have those? No, but they are useful ways, useful traditions of honoring. And, there are traditions about those traditions, right? You better give your mother a Mother's Day card, right? That's just, if you're going to miss something, don't miss that. I've told you about the kid that gave it a week early, right? Because he was afraid to miss that. He got it, right? I didn't know when Mother's Day was, but I thought I should go early than late. Okay. He's got the spirit of it. He's got the heart of it. Moses said, honor your father and mother, and whoever speaks evil of father or mother must surely die. That sounds pretty severe. I don't know that they were practicing that. But you say that if anyone tells father or mother, whatever support you might have had from me, Mom and Dad, you're in need, and I have means, but it's Corban. And Corban was one of their traditions. Corban is an offering that's set aside to God. I could take this resources I have and I could help you, but I have dedicated to God. You don't want me to take it away from God, do you? I wish I could. So you see what he's getting about their traditions? They have created traditions that go against the spirit, the heart, the intent of honor your father and mother by saying there's a higher calling, right? There's something more important that we have to do with that, and surely you'll understand. Then you no longer permit doing anything for a father or mother, thus making void the word of God through your tradition that you have handed on. And you do many things like this. The issue, again, is not their tradition. The issue is their heart. They use what God intended for good. They find a way to twist it and say, oh, sorry. And what else happened with Corban? Well, it was a very public vow. You with me? They could show off to other people this great gift they were bringing to God. And, it works. People go, wow. Because we get amazed at the size of the gift without realizing sometimes how it got there. And we all know the story of the widow and the two mites, right? Jesus turns that upside down. It's not the public display of the amount. It's the heart. And let's talk about heart for just a minute. When heart is used in the New Testament, heart for Jewish people wasn't just emotional. Sometimes we think about a rational side and an emotional side. That's the heart side. The other's the head side, right? We're familiar with that kind of language. That's not really how they're using it. Heart is all of that. It's the emotion, but it's also the will. It's the idea. It's a metaphor for the mind and the emotion and the will, all of that kind of combined. And so when Jesus talks about hard hearts here, in just a second, he's talking about people that are unwilling to see things a different way, right? They know how things are. They've got it lined up. when somebody says, well, I did that, but it's not illegal, right? Well, that's because maybe certain people have made the rules that it's not illegal. And my response to some of that stuff is, well, it still doesn't make it right. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right. It's depending on the intent and the purpose of who made the laws, right? So Jesus is pretty straight on with them. Clark.
I think the primary thing is the heart or the intentions, but there's a secondary issue, which is that even if they had good intentions, which they didn't, the traditions need to fulfill commands. So Mother's Day is Mother's Day to fulfill a higher command.
Right.
Once tradition starts to go above the command or contradict the command, whatever, then it's totally different. Now it's human will is displacing God.
Right. And the problem we have with some traditions, it gets unmoored from how it started, right? And your family has traditions, and some of them still have benefit, and some of them you forgot why you're doing them, right? And the classic story is with the ham. You know this story? The family always gets a ham, and they cut off one end, and they just cook one end. And the little girl one day asked her mom, why do you do that? Well, that's the way my mom did it. I just thought that's the way you did it. But I don't know why. So I said, well, let's ask Grandma. Yeah, ask Grandma. And she said, oh, my oven wasn't big enough. I had to cut part of the ham off. I mean, there was a tradition of why it was needed to be done that was no longer, the practice was no longer moored to that. So it is helpful to look at our traditions and make sure they're fulfilling the intent that they did. Nothing wrong with questioning, because sometimes the answer is yes, they are fulfilling that, the things we intend for them to do. Another side note, I want to challenge you on something. If I ask you a question of opinion, and you say an answer like, well, I feel that we ought to go on Saturday. Now, sometimes we describe that as a feeling, right? Because we said, I feel that. We may not have a list of concrete reasons why Saturday is better than Friday, but we use the term I feel that. Anytime we use I feel that, we're really saying this is what I think, right? Maybe without any reasons, but I feel that is not an emotion. I feel that we better be done by 7:45 tonight. Well, that's not really an emotion. That's a thought. That's maybe something you like. So again, this heart thing is not necessarily just an emotional. I'm just driving that point a little further. Emotions are sad, glad, mad. Right? And emotions aren't wrong. Thinking can be very screwed up and wrong. But even when I think I'm right, I can be wrong. Verse 14. Then he called the crowd again and said to them, listen, all of you, and understand. Now, remember, these are people that had practiced these kind of rituals their entire life and understood their meaning. This is how you get clean. You go through these rituals. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile. That's going to be hard for all of them to swallow. It is different than their expectations. But the things that come out are what defile. So this is a monumental shift. They're going to need help and understanding. His disciples, we're going to see in just a second, are going to need some help and understanding. And he's not saying obey the law and not the traditions. Remember, this is not about traditions. This is about heart. Just like a few chapters before, we talked about the Sabbath. He didn't say the Sabbath wasn't important, but he said obey the meaning of the law, just like Clark was suggesting a while ago. The way we might say it is obey the heart of the law, the intent, what God's trying to draw out in us, not necessarily the letter. Because what's the problem with the letter? We use it to say, I don't have to do any more. I did what was required. I did what the law said. I don't have to do any more. And Jesus is pushing us to expect something different. If God only did the letter of the law, we're all in trouble, right? Jim?
Yeah, up to this point, the people, like you say, they dealt with the letter of the law. This is what the law says, this is how far we can go. But now, Jesus is turning that around.
Yeah.
You no longer have to deal with the letter of the law, that you can't.
And it's bigger, right? It's bigger. It's harder. The letter of the law is good because you know. You don't want a sign that says speed limit about 40. Okay, how much is about? You want a sign that says 40. And you know whether you're speeding or not speeding, right? You get to choose. We don't want it great. And so it is good. And if you think about it, when eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth came along, that was a good thing. We think that's harsh. No, it used to be, you do something to me, I do more back to you, and then what happens? Well, you have to do more back to me, and then I get my family, and we do more to, you see how it escalates? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was justice. You don't extract more than what was given. Right. Even though there is the idea of restitution. Jeff.
Once again, God has a plan, Jesus has a plan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're a Pharisee or you're anybody listening to Jesus, that's in direct conflict. Okay, it's flat out in direct conflict. You can push around all you want. But Leviticus says very clearly, if you make yourself unclean by these whenever you touch them. Okay? So I always think we have to give these people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Pharisees were teaching something Leviticus doesn't come right out and say.
No. And that's what it made it so hard for them to see. But what is Jesus doing with this teaching? I think he realizes if the Gentiles are going to be accepted, there's some barriers that are going to have to be broken down, and he's preparing them.
Also, he's pointing out a hypocrisy. You can't separate the first half of this from the second half. If they hadn't been hypocritical about Korban and so on, if they had simply been strict about following the law, then there's really no opportunity for Jesus to give them a hard time here.
Correct.
It's, legalistic thinking can be making things extra strict, coming up with all kinds of new commandments about what it means to observe the Sabbath, for example. We've seen that. Or you can employ legalistic lawyer-type thinking to make things easier, especially on yourself. Then you get into this, I'm going to make things strict on other people, take extra work on them. But then this Korban example, I've got this legalistic way of thinking that lets me off the hook, and so that's what it happens in both directions, but in particular, it happens in one direction when I'm imposing on other people,
And that is the heart of,
direction when I'm letting myself off.
and that's the heart of the matter here. It's not the tradition. Jesus is not saying you were wrong because you developed these traditions. I don't think he's even attacking the traditions. He's attacking their heart that allowed them to have loopholes, but yet look like they were being very pious.
I just had a thought.
Okay?
God sent Jesus to show us
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't to have a bunch of laws. See, we found out, as smart as we are in this country, that laws don't work.
Mm.
That you can't govern by those laws. You have to make another law to make the other law. You keep on and on with other amendments.
Yeah.
God's law, it was to show that his family loved people. He loved those, even the Pharisees, but they couldn't recognize it.
Right. Sometimes we make the mistake, say all laws are equal, but they're not. And Jesus even said that. When they asked him, which laws are important, he said, here's the top two. Love God, love others, right? Everything else is built on that. Well, let's continue. Let's get the disciples in here. Verse 17. When he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about the parable. He said to them, then do you also fail to understand? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart but the stomach and goes out into the sewer? Thus, what he's really doing is saying all food is clean. That's going to be hard for them to get, but we know later Peter does. And he said, it's what comes out of a person that defiles. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, variance, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All of these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. Because here's the danger: we can keep the law and think, okay, we do that over here and over here. I do this other stuff, whatever I want. I come to church, but my life elsewhere may look different. So I really think Jesus is beginning to tear down this barrier between the Gentiles and the Jews. They thought it was rules that made them pure and therefore better, even if their heart was impure, and that's a problem. So we go then right into two stories that just happened to take place in the Gentile area. Verse 24. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. And there's no way to soften this. Jesus is pretty direct. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of his daughter. He said to her, let the children be fed first, for it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Well, that word there, dogs, was a slur for Gentiles that Jews used. She got it. She knew exactly what he was saying. Because look at her response. And I love this, because what kind of faith, courage, need forced this statement? But she answered him, Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Then he said to her, for saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. She went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. So she's a pagan probably. Doesn't say that explicitly, but it sure seems to imply it. She's not doing the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob thing. She has no claim on the Jewish Messiah or his kingdom. But Jesus seems to make it pretty clear she passes the test. How did she come to Jesus? On her knees, humbly, right? In humility. How are the Pharisees and scribes coming?
Dressed up pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what Jesus is calling. The hard heart doesn't let anything in that needs to come in. A humble heart says, I don't have anything I need. And then just right on top of that, verse 31. Then he returned from the region of Tyre, and he went the way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. Has he been there? Yep. What happened last time? Demon-possessed man. Remember him? And what happened at the end of that? Remember last time he was there? After he did that, what did he do? What did the people do? They, yeah, get out of here. They were in fear of him. Well, he returns. Look what happened this time. They brought to him a deaf man. Oh, wait a minute. They're bringing people to him? So, reading between the lines, not an important detail, but a fun thing to think about. You remember what he told the formerly demon-possessed man? No. This one he told to go talk about it. Go witness. Tell people what I did. I think it appears that he did, because he gets a different reception returning than when he was leaving. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd. Now, so think about, what does Jesus have to do this to heal this man? Why would he do this? He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be open. And immediately his ears were open, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, he has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak.
Nobody really knows why he did it that particular way. He didn't do all his miracles that way.
Sometimes he just spoke. Sometimes people had touched him. Before we touch on that, I think Mark's trying to tell us is, hey, you Jewish people who are not open, he is opening the ears and loosening the tongues of Gentiles. I don't think that's on accident that we are reported that story in this order. And as a side note, why did he do it this way? I think he's in foreign territory. He's with Gentiles. And perhaps he was just meeting. They all had healing rituals, things that they did, folklore, ways of addressing illness. And it may be because they weren't Jews, he was fitting their context, something they would be used to, something they would suspect. Now, there's no way to know or prove that, but he's not letting do it the Jewish way be a barrier to healing this person. So, he's challenging his disciples on some of their expectations, but sometimes he goes with maybe the prevalent expectation of how you do things if it's not central to what he's trying to do.
There's a whole series of episodes in the life of Jesus that are outside of the individual. He is not only doing something that will stick in the apostles' minds, and then the gospel writers will preach it later concerning those who are not Jews, but I think he's actually preparing these regions for the gospel.
Absolutely.
He could have just avoided going through Samaria.
Yes.
Instead, he went there and engaged them. So that prepares when Philip the evangelist goes to Samaria in Acts. Jesus has done some advance work. Jesus has gone to the Decapolis. He's gone up to Tyre and Sidon. And I think that this is all looking to the future in addition to training the disciples.
Yeah, and it's helping the disciples in that they're able to model off of what he did. He's giving them time to break down some of their expectations.
Just occurred to me that if he had never done that, the disciples might have thought, are we going to go beyond what Jesus did?
Exactly. Yeah. So faith in Jesus, another way to say this, it seems to bring God's grace to expression in many different ways. Right? Not just one way. Many different ways. And in different contexts. Then we get to chapter 8. Let's just go a little ways in chapter 8 here. We get a repeat. Mark, didn't you know you already talked about something like this? In those days, when there were again a great crowd without anything to eat, he called his disciples and said to them, and I would love to have inflection here, because all we have is the words. I want to know the tone that they both said this. Was this a repeat for the disciples to respond differently? Are they being playful or are they being obstinate? I don't know. I have compassion for the crowd because they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance. His disciples replied, how can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? Did they say it with a grin on their face because they knew? We just don't know. Are they already forgetting the 5,000? I want to think it's the former, where they were playing with him, like, how are we going to do that, Jesus? And they have some idea. Clark.
I think maybe it's kind of good that they don't take miracles for granted.
Exactly.
It's not like we've got God on a string like a puppet, and whenever we just need a miracle, we can just call one up and so on. So even though they've seen Jesus do miracles,
Yeah. I like that.
maybe it's not some lack of faith on their part, but just it's not. It would be arrogant to just say, "No problem. We'll just ask Jesus to do it."
Jesus fixes everything. We just snap our fingers. Yeah. But notice his response. He immediately asked them, how many loaves do you have? They said 7. Then they ordered the crowd. You know how it goes. In the end, how many baskets they get? 7. And immediately they left and they went to the district of Dalmatia. And it may be some significance that this was in Gentile territory this time. He's not only feeding Jewish people, but others. But it really sets up what happens next. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, asking him for a sign from heaven to test him. What's the problem with this? And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation. Is that because he doesn't care? Is because they've already proved they're not looking, because if they were looking, what would they have already had? They already had signs, right? 5,000, 4,000 deaf, blind, lame. And this doesn't mean Jesus is going to stop doing miracles. The biggest miracle is yet to come, right? Resurrection from the dead, I think that trumps all of these things. Because their heart is hard. They're not looking to understand. Right? That's the difference. Now the disciples had forgotten to bring any bread, and they had only one loaf with them on the boat, and he cautioned them, saying, watch out. Object lesson. Watch out, beware the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. They said to one another, is it because we have no bread? Okay, they're not yet catching up with him. And becoming aware of it, Jesus said to them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? See, he's trying to get them to see you have a choice to make. The tension's here. Are you going to go with the Pharisees? Or are you going to keep coming with me? I don't think that's in disappointment. That's a wake-up question. Wait a minute. What are we doing here?
You know that Jesus could read the heart.
Yeah.
He knew what they were thinking. And he knew that these guys were going to need this later on. So he double emphasized. He said, you know, it's like in good preaching practice, you repeat something that's important, you know. Jesus is repeating something that's important.
Well, and here he's going to also, in that same vein, remind them of what's been done, with the implication being if it happened before, what's going to happen? It's going to happen again. Because every time we have a new crisis, it's, oh no, how are we going to get through this? Well, like we have before, right? Not meaning we copycat it, but we find a way forward. We keep moving forward. So he goes into the whole thing. Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear? And do you not remember? See? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets? They said 12. And for the 4,000?
This is a dad. when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?
Maybe.
He's talking about the use of the Pharisees there.
Yeah.
They didn't believe any of it anyway.
Well, and again, let's go back to Jeff's point, because this is very important. Who were their respected religious leaders? The Pharisees. This is hard on all of them. It's turning everything over. Anytime we give our authority away to someone else, it's difficult to move away from where they're at. And that's part of what has happened here. Okay, let's finish out here real quick. I still got 2 minutes. They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes and his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Yeah, I can see, but it's kind of blurry. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then he sent him away home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." This is a miracle, but it's also a parable, isn't it? What's Jesus saying? Is it because Jesus wasn't good at miracles yet that he had to do it twice? What's the point being made here? Your sight is improving, but we got to keep going. And it's interesting that this is, you can talk about this verse as the end of the first half of Mark or the beginning of the second half of Mark. And the message seems to be, hang in there. We're making progress. Things are changing. You're starting to see, but there's more things to be seen, and you need to see more clearly. Yeah, keep coming. That's what separated the disciples from the Pharisees. They kept returning to Jesus. They didn't let their heart become so hardened that they couldn't take in what he was saying and what he was showing them. So, in closing, here's what challenged me this week. Do I approach Jesus with the same humility of the Syrophoenician woman? Am I slow to see? I certainly need continued touch to see more clearly. Glad you're here.